Alright, hello folks. What we are going to be going through this evening is how to create these proportional Previs character models. Now the purpose of this is to be able to have, well, highly proportional character models that you can then connect to a rig for use in Previs animations to block out your early animation passes. But the other purpose is to actively have proportional reference for when you're building the final model. So you know that the wrists and elbows and shoulders and hips and knees and head are all in the correct place relative to each other, following standard modes of anatomy and proportions. So, you will notice that I've got around my characters these little gray boxy outlines, which if I just take that off of template, give us this rough idea of exactly how tall the characters are. So for example, I've got this small little Nomi character who, if you look at the size of the box, it's kind of relative to the size of their head. So I could say this Nomi character here is about 4 heads high. His anatomy all fits within that. And he's about 2 heads at his widest point, which is the span of his arms. Our hero character is about 8 heads high and 2 heads at the widest point, which is the span of her arms. And now both of these will follow rules as to what of their anatomy falls into which section of which box. Now those rules are not ones we have to make up at all, because there is a treasure trove of history we can pull on. This whole idea of building character proportions around X heads high or wide has been around since oh god, like the 1940s and 50s at least. I mean, Andrew Loomis was writing textbooks on it, and those have been passed down and regurgitated into pretty much every single character design course that you're going to find around the world. Now, in the realm of cartooning and illustration, comic books, and 2D animation, this concept of building a character out of X heads high is well established. But for some reason we haven't really seen it come through into the 3D realm, and building characters with good proportions is historically difficult. So we are going to try and rectify that tonight. Okay, so let's get started, and we'll create a brand new scene and start working out our settings and building our character height reference. Okay, so first of all, when you're going to be building any kind of characters for rigging, you want to make sure that your preferences are set up correctly. So I'm going to go to Window, Settings and Preferences. Under Settings, you'll find these working units. Now, at default, Maya sets them to centimeters. We want to set them to meters. So, in most films and animation, you're probably going to be working to architectural or real-world units, so you're going to need meters there anyways. And many games engines are going to be reflective of meters or centimeters, so you might as well, again, work in meters. Now if you work in meters and you export a 1x1 cube from Maya and bring it into Unity, it is going to be the equivalent size to a 1x1 cube generated in Unity. So there's your little useless factoid for the evening. So I'll save that. And the next thing I want to set up is just to make sure that my grid is reflective of every one of these little squares being a 1 meter by 1 meter cube. So I'll go to Display, Grid, Options, and now if I've got grid lines set to every 1, that means yes, there will be a grid line at every 1 meter point. If it was set to, say, 2, for example, I would have a grid line at every 2 by 2 meter point, which of course is not what I want. So let's set that back down to 1. Subdivisions would just increase or decrease the number of grid lines that go through each space. which of course makes it very difficult for me right now to see where 1 by 1 meters is. So let's just set that back to 1. Hit apply. Okay, I have a 1 by 1 meter grid. The next thing I want to do is set up my creation tools, so my polygon primitives. Now the polygon primitives I'm going to be using the most are my cubes and cylinders, and I'm going to want to bring them in at a 1-for-1 ratio every single time and not worry about this whole interactive creation thing. Let me just show you what interactive creation looks like so you can know when it's wrong. So that's interactive creation. It comes in saying it's all 1-for-1, when obviously that 1-for-1 has absolutely no relation to the 1-for-1 space we have on our grid. Totally useless. So we're going to turn off interactive creation, as cute as that is, so that when we create a cube, it just shows up as a cube. And if I were to then, say, change its pivot point and snap it into the corner of the grid, you'll see that it just plops right down in 1-for-1. Now that's also partially because my cube settings are correct. So I'll just go create polygon primitives cube options. Now if you had any other numbers in here for whatever reason, just go in and do edit reset settings, and that will send it all back to 1-for-1. And that's your cube, pretty as a dandy. Next polygon you're going to use most often here is the cylinder. Now the cylinder at default comes in heavy. Lots of polygons all on the sides, lots of polygons on top. We don't need anything this heavy. There's entirely too many faces. Now the reason why this is entirely too many faces is that, well, for one, when your cylinder's on screen, it's going to be about that big. And Maya can only render so many pixels, or any engine can only render so many pixels on the screen at one time, so most of those vertices are actually going to waste anyways. 2, the more vertices you have across the character and the more joints you have in space, the slower your game or animation is going to run. So if something has got really crap frames per second, chances are people weren't very careful with the number of polygons and joints and things that they used to make it. So we're going to set up our cylinder to be correct from the get-go. So axis divisions at 20, it looks like that, and at 6 it looks like this, which again, if I make these both very, very small on screen, you can barely tell the difference except for the strange shading on that one, which is of course you can deal with a quick smooth, and again, you can't tell the difference. Okay, so 6 sides is definitely what we want. Now at the moment it's going to come in huge, way too large. Okay, so radius, let's go for 0.5. Let's just have both of these settings. So instead of 1, we'll do 0.5, and instead of height 2, we'll do 1. If I bring that in now, you'll see that we are at about the same measurements as our cube. Ta-da! Okay, so now every single cylinder that you create is going to come in at measurements you can easily work with. Same thing with every single cube. So those are the first 2 settings we want to set up. And I'll just create a new shelf here. So we'll call this Previs. So I've already set up my cube and cylinder correctly, so I might as well just add that to my shelf now. So to add something to my shelf, I'll hold down Control and Shift, and I'll just go Polygon Primitives and grab that cube, and you'll see it drops here on my shelf. Now, the thing I'm most likely to do after I create a cube is I'm going to smooth it. And the reason why is I create this very nice, soft, polygonal shape, which I can then duplicate around, and it has significantly fewer polygons than, say, a polygon sphere, which is just heavy with vertices. So yes, let's not bother with that. And the other reason is that this is a shape that's extremely easy to modify into our various body parts. So whenever I create a cube, I'm very likely to smooth it immediately after, which means I want to have smooth right there on the shelf. So again, I'll go to Mesh, hold down Control and Shift, and smooth is just there under Shape. So those are my two most frequently used operations there. Now if you can't see these menus at the top, like Mesh, Edit Mesh, Mesh Tools, chances are you are using a different drop-down menu here. So previously we were in polygons, and I switched over previously we were in animation, and I switched over to polygons so that I have access to these polygon editing tools. Okay, so we changed our cylinder. Let's go back and Control Shift to create our cylinder and add that there. So these are the tools we're going to use most often. And I'll be adding a few different tools to this as we go. Okay, but first, let's create a little yardstick for how tall our character is going to be. Now to do this, I want to go into Orthographic and Front View. Now, each of these are a meter high. So if I had a character, and I will just bring a cube in, I'm going to change its pivot point to the corner here so that I can hold down X and drag it into the 0, 0 space. And then I'm going to make that very, very thin, just so I can treat this as a yardstick. So let's pretend that I said I had a character 2 meters high, so 200 centimeters high. That would be a bloody tall character. And this would be the yardstick that I would use to measure that. Now, what I'll do instead is find out exactly how tall my character should be. So, if I Google average human height, I get the average human height for a male is about 1.7 meters, and the average human height for a female is about 1.6 meters. Now, the character that I'm going to be doing Previs for, and I'll just drag her over real quick so you can see that here. Alright, so the character I'm doing Previs for is this female hero character. So she's going to have at least average, if not above average, proportions. So I'm definitely going to take advantage of that 1.6 and set up that yardstick now. Okay, so if she's going to be 1.6 meters tall, and this is 1 meter tall, then all I should have to do is change that Y to 1.6, and I have myself a yardstick that is 1.6 meters tall. Done. We can all go home. Previs was great. Thank you all for coming. Okay, I might do a little bit more. Okay, so here's my yardstick for how tall that character is. Now, why is that important? I'm going to change the grids of this grid plane to actually reflect how many heads tall my character is, as opposed to how many meters tall it is. So I need to have this yardstick at all times to make sure that I'm actually operating in the correct units of measurement. So let's just quickly name this to height measurement. Not the most original of names, but it gets the job done. And then let's change our grid. So how am I deciding how many heads tall my character is going to be? Let's just bring up our Google window, and if I type in human proportions, we'll go human character proportions. Okay, so already you're going to start seeing all of these example images as to giving you reference for different characters of different body types and how many heads high they might be. So the most useful ones are of course going to be high resolution. We have some cartoony references of what a taller kid might look compared to a short 3-year-old. We have 4.5 heads high versus 3 heads high. Let's get some higher resolution ones going on there. This is a classic one where we see we've got a character, male character, who is 8 heads high, and it's broken down. The length of a head comes down to the pectoral line, comes down again to the belly button, down to the crotch. The next head down is about just below mid-thigh, but you see it's that point where the thigh changes shape dramatically. Another head just to the bottom of the knees, another head at the point where the calves change shape dramatically, and finally the last head ends at the heels. So this is a breakdown of a character that's 8 heads high and 2 heads wide at its widest point. Now you'll find that most characters will fit into this archetype. So again, we have a female character here, which is about 7.5 heads high, a child, which is about 6 heads high, and a male character, which is about 8 heads high. Now, my hero character here, being the hero character, is going to also be 8 heads high. So here is our heroic hero character portion reference for female. And I will be loosely referring back to this as I work. Not entirely loosely. I'll follow this as closely as I can. But because I don't have things like all these various details to rely on, I'm going to have to work on the larger forms. Yeah, so let's get started. My hero character is about 8 heads high, so let's create our grid of heads, which sounds so ominous. So I'll go back to my orthographic front view, and I want from the top of this 1.6 meter high yardstick to the bottom to be broken up into 8 lines of squares. And to do that, I'm going to have to do some quick maths and calculate what 1.6 is divided by 8. And fortunately, that's fairly easy. That's going to be about 0.2. So let's see what happens if we set up our grid to have grid lines every 0.2 units. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 heads high. Perfect. Okay. So now that we've got grid lines set up to every 0.2 units, we want to make sure our cubes are also set up to every 0.2 units. So let's go into Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube, Options. And we'll set those all to 0.2. So that every cube we create from this point forward comes in at the right scale and proportion, as you can see thusly. Alright. And let's just create our little measurements here. So we'll actually create cubes of X heads high. If you're wondering why it's taken me so long to do this, it's because it is quite late here in Australia, and I would like to get this up in time for y'all Americans to wake up. Okay, I have 8 heads high, and we will just grab all those and duplicate and slide that across so that we have 8 heads high and 2 heads wide. And now what we can do is we don't need that yardstick anymore. It has done its job. We can create a new layer just for our scale reference here. So I'll select all my cubes, and over here in the layer menu On the far right it says create a new layer and assign selected objects. If you can hear that plane going overhead at the moment, it's because I'm living in the inner west, and everyone who lives in the inner west pays ridiculous prices to have the privilege of hearing planes go overhead at 10 p.m. at night. So I'm naming this layer scale reference, and I'm actually going to create a new material as well. So I'll just select all my cubes, right click, go new material. I'll just create a Lambert, and I want to change the name of that Lambert, so I'll go to Lambert 2 tab here, and we'll just go matte scale reference, because I want to just make this a little bit more transparent than everything else that's going to be coming in. Okay, so I have my scale reference set up, and the next step is going to be to start blocking in the rest of my character. Okay, this is a pretty good place to stop, and we'll catch you in the next video.